Good morning. I'm Ryan Schoenfeld, the proud superintendent of the Ardsley School District, and we're here this morning for, I'll say, a momentous occasion. We've been working together, the Ardsley Historical Society, myself and the school district, since I've come here. So this is my 5th year, and we've had some successful projects. We've been working to help support the restoration of the Odell House, and I know that will be mentioned, and thank you for being here and leading that work. But that's in that direction, and that corresponds with why we're putting a historical marker here as well. Before I go any further, I want to thank all of you for being here. It means a lot to us. I also want to just take a couple moments to thank those people, the brave people that worked for the freedom that we all have and have been preserved today. If we go back in time to 1781, that's when people were training here on these, I'll say, hallowed grounds. And again, imagine being a young adult and or a person that's part of a family and dedicating, after fighting for 5 years, to continue to train to try to preserve our freedom. Our summers are very different than that was. I couldn't imagine living in this community and having people encamped here. So it's interesting to reflect on that. And that brings us forward also to where we are today. So prior to that, can we just give a moment of silence for, again, the time, effort, and lives that have been invested to help preserve our freedom. Thank you. Today we're going to have some speakers talk with you. We have students from our newly formed club, which is the local historic club for Ardsley. So we have local history. And we have Mr. Nappy and Mr. Grady who are chairing that, and our students as well. I've worked closely with the president of the Ardsley Historical Society, Peter Marcus, and to my right and to most of your left, we have our marker. That will be unveiled in a little bit, but it is in a location where people can see it, and we talked about how can we educate as well. So the QR code, you'd be able to, as a passerby or a visitor, and our hope is in conjunction with the Odell House and other landmarkers around here in history, we'd have field trips and local tours that people would be able to see this, but they'd be able to learn. So we added that, very purposeful. So I want to thank Peter Marcus again. You've been very diligent too. He keeps me moving forward. He made this happen, and I really appreciate your friendship and what you're doing on behalf of our community and our school district. So without further ado, I'm going to have Peter Marcus come on up and speak to you as the president of the Ardsley Historical Society.
Thanks a lot. Good morning, everyone. And again, thank you for coming. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the superintendent for encouraging this partnership between the Ardsley School District and the Ardsley Historical Society. I especially want to thank him for his support of the Society's application for this historic marker. In May of last year, the Society applied to the William G. Pomeroy Foundation for an historic marker to recognize this significant event in Ardsley's history. For those of you that don't know what the Pomeroy Foundation is, since 2005, they've had the responsibility for reviewing and approving all applications for historic markers. Let me tell you, this is a very, very rigorous process. One of the things that they require is primary source documentation. For those of you that don't know what that means, it means you have to provide documents that were created at the time of the event. As Dr. Schoenfeld mentioned, 1781 is over 200 years ago. So there's not a lot of newspaper articles or obviously the internet wasn't around at that time. One of the things that helped me, however, was being able to access Library of Congress documents via the internet. And one of the rich documents that I was able to review was George Washington's diary. And he kept a very meticulous diary every day, all the major activities that went on. Also a number of documents that were put together by the French officers, including maps. And that was key for us to be able to identify where things were in relation to each other. In December, our application was approved along with a grant to purchase the marker, and at the end of June, that marker was installed here at the high school property. Now, the significance of this encampment can best be understood in relation to three other sites. Number 7, the site of the American military camp, is on both sides of Heatherdale Road, which back in the day was called Military Road because of all the traffic of troops and equipment. And here you see Farm Road off of Heatherdale, an approximate area of where the high school is today. So troops were actually camped on this property. Now, their commander, as everyone knows, was George Washington. His headquarters is only about less than half a mile away. It's set back from what is now Secor Road. It was at the farmhouse of Joseph Appleby, and unfortunately, we do not have any remains of that farmhouse in existence, but we know from documentation approximately where it was. It's on the site of where WFAS radio station was. Now, the French camp, this would be number 8, was on the grounds of the Sunningdale Country Club, which is off of Underhill Road, and there is also a marker from the Pomeroy Association commemorating that encampment. And their general was General Rochambeau, and his headquarters is at the Odell House, which is on present-day Ridge Road. Now, the Odell House is in the process of being restored, with the end goal of turning it into a museum that would be open to the public. So this is the 4 sites in this area that are all related to one another. The Odell House is key because that was the site of where the meetings took place between the two generals. They met there frequently, and that's where they plotted their strategy for how to win the war. Again, 1776 to 1781 is a long 5-year period to be fighting. So we'll see how this encampment is related to all those properties and to the war, because now we'll have readers who are members of this middle school historical club come and read to us parts of this narrative which talks about the American Revolution. So for the background, we have 2 young ladies, Sia Aurora and Adrian Tapia.
On July 4th, 1776, as every American knows, the 13 colonies unanimously approved their Declaration of Independence from Great Britain. However, this document was not well received by the British, and many battles would need to be fought in America as the colonies tried to gain their independence. The first major battle was the Battle of Long Island, also known as the Battle of Brooklyn, and it was fought on August 27, 1776. Over 20,000 British troops outnumbered the 12,000 Continental troops. With their victory, the British gained access to the port of New York, which they held for the rest of the war. On September 15, 1776, the Battle of Kips Bay was fought on the East River shore of Manhattan. Again, 4,000 British troops far outnumbered and overwhelmed 450 American troops.
Following the retreat of Washington Army northward from New York City, British General William Howe landed his troops in Westchester County with the intention of cutting off Washington's escape route. This Battle of White Plains on October 28th forced Washington to retreat even further north. The pattern of these battles was very clear. The British had the advantage in troop numbers, equipment, and training. Despite General Washington's pleas to the Continental Congress for more troops, equipment, and money, and the Continental Army continued to be at a marked disadvantage against the British. This forced the Americans to consider other options.
Next, Anthony Porco will tell us a little bit about the alliance that the Americans had with France. Anthony?
Alliance with France. French assistance was brokered by Continental Congressman Benjamin Franklin. The French viewpoint was that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, the common enemy being Great Britain. France provided the Americans with much-needed cash and soldiers and allowed them to trade freely with French merchants in their ports around the globe. In December 1776, the Continental Congress sent Franklin to France to convince the French government to provide even more assistance. The Americans needed military engineers, money, weapons, ammunition, uniforms, and the force of the French Navy. France even encouraged Spain to assist the Americans, which they did by providing funds and also protection for American ships in the Caribbean waters. On February 6, 1778, France and the United States signed the Treaty of Amity and Commerce, where France recognized the United States as a free and independent nation and formally established trade between the two countries.
And now, talking about the French troops, Mr. Sean Grady, one of the advisors to the Middle School History Club.
Thank you. Thanks in large part to the efforts of the Marquis de Lafayette, a French officer who passionately supported the Americans' cause and French public support, the French government agreed to supply the Americans with an army of relief, a fleet of ships, and an outright gift of money. On July 11, 1780, the French sailed into Newport, Rhode Island. Over the course of the 70-day voyage, nearly 200 men had died. On arrival, 800 soldiers and 1,500 sailors were suffering from scurvy. Fortunately, most of the sick men did recover. However, it took several weeks for most of the army to return to full fitness. Since Washington remained with his army in New York, he used Lafayette to be his liaison with Rochambeau. The two generals finally met for the first time on September 21, 1780, in Hartford, Connecticut, the midpoint between the two camps. Both generals admitted that they were short of men, materials, and money. The French opposed a major engagement against the British until both armies had ample troops as well as naval superiority. Since no additional assistance was immediately forthcoming from France, the soldiers in Newport settled in for a long, bleak winter. In the spring, preparations began for their move to New York. By June 10, 1781, the army was ready to move to Phillipsburg, New York, to meet up with the American troops. A total of 5,300 soldiers began the trip, including 450 officers, plus 1,300 civilians who served as cooks, drivers, servants, etc. On June 11th, the French army boarded a collection of small ships and sailed up the bay to Providence, Rhode Island. Between June 18th and 21st, the army began their march to New York in a staggered start, with a different regiment leaving Providence each day. The army arrived near Phillipsburg by July 6th, 2 weeks after they had left Newport. In that time, they had traveled 200 miles.
Now, the American troops. In the summer of 1781, 4,000 soldiers were camped on both sides of Military Road, now known as Heatherdale Road. There were also hundreds of civilians at the camp. They assisted the troops as doctors, cooks, blacksmiths, coopers, and other tradespeople. The property on the north side of the road is where Ardsley High School is now located. These soldiers were part of the Continental Army under the leadership of General George Washington, who were fighting in the American Revolution. They camped here for 6 weeks, from July 6th to August 19th, which was the longest encampment of the campaign. The soldiers foraged for food and water and practiced military maneuvers under officers such as Alexander Hamilton. Much of the training took place on the grounds of what is now Concord Road Elementary School. The density of the military population was so great during that time that local historian Robert A. Selig refers to it as the 4th largest city behind New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. George Washington had his headquarters at Joseph Appleby's farmhouse, which was located a half-mile to the north on present-day Secor Road, near where the WFAS radio station is located. The Grand Reconnaissance. General Washington's original plan had been to attack the British forces here in New York. However, the information discovered during the Grand Reconnaissance made Washington reconsider this plan. The Grand Reconnaissance was the joint French-American military operation in Westchester County and the Bronx that took place from July 21st through 23rd. This military operation involved over 4,000 American and French troops who marched on 4 separate local roads to reconnoiter the British positions in New York. The troops spent their time surveying the British strength at various locations to determine if a successful attack here was possible. It soon became clear that it was not a wise plan, since the British forces had control of the high ground and they had superior troop strength. However, this strong move towards New York City helped convince the British that the combined forces did intend to attack New York and thereby discouraged them from sending reinforcements to the British troops in the South. Mr. Nappy will now talk about the new strategy.
As the generals debated strategy, they received news of French Admiral de Grasse's plans to sail into Chesapeake Bay with much-needed troops and supplies. Generals Washington and Rochambeau then devised an ambitious plan to march together to Yorktown, Virginia, where they would meet up with Admiral de Grasse's ships and reinforcements and then engage the enemy. The success of this strategy was dependent on multiple factors. First, Admiral de Grasse's fleet arriving safely from the West Indies where they were currently located. Second, British General Cornwallis's army remaining at Yorktown. Third, British General Clinton's army and navy remaining in New York. Fourth, French Admiral de Barra's fleet arriving from Newport with guns, ammunition, artillerymen, and provisions. And last but certainly not least, and I would say arguably probably the most difficult, the American and French armies making it to Yorktown in force and in good health, with all of their equipment after marching for 400 miles within weeks. Generals Washington and Rochambeau decided to leave a small force in New York and march south with 2,700 Continental soldiers and 4,200 French troops. By August 26th, all of the Allied forces had crossed the Hudson River and disappeared from view. The march was very challenging. Roads were often in very bad shape, and bridges had to be repaired or even built ahead of the oncoming armies. Soldiers were rising by 2:30 each morning. Yes, folks, that's 2:30 a.m. Marching within 90 minutes and camping by early afternoon. This daily routine was intended to help the troops escape detection by the British and to conserve energy, since the weather in late August was very hot and humid. By August 31st, the armies had reached Trenton, New Jersey, and by September 2nd, they had reached Philadelphia. From there, they marched to Wilmington, Delaware, and from there to Head of Elk, which is now called Elkton, Maryland, a port town at the northern shore of the Chesapeake Bay. Hazen's regiment had stayed behind near New York City to guard the rear and confuse the British, while Washington's and Rochambeau's columns had moved through New Jersey. The deception had bought time that the Allies needed to get away safely. On August 28th, Hazen's men left their New York location and sped, mostly by water, to Christiana Bridge, where they rejoined the rest of the Continentals. On August 30th, Admiral de Grasse's entire fleet safely arrived in the Chesapeake and delivered their 3,300 soldiers to Lafayette. On September 6th, Rochambeau and his army left Chester for Head of Elk, Maryland. On September 8th, Washington and his staff, together with guards and servants, galloped ahead to Baltimore to secure transport from there to nearby Yorktown. 3 days later, boats carrying soldiers and military goods left Baltimore. On September 14th, Washington and Rochambeau arrived in Williamsburg, Virginia, with their troops.
And now to tell us about the battles of Yorktown, Ari Lorient.
With Admiral de Grasse's ships sealing the coast and rivers and enough men to cover major avenues of land escape, the Allies were finally strong enough to move into Williamsburg on September 4th. However, the next day, the combined British fleet had arrived and the French fleet sailed out to engage them. In what became known as the Battle of the Capes, 240 French sailors and 336 British sailors were killed or seriously wounded. The British fleet had taken very heavy damage, and they fled with the French fleet in hot pursuit. On September 8th, the sea battle resumed with the French fleet again, chasing the British into the night. When the British fleet fled southward, leaving British General Cornwallis to fend for himself, the French fleet returned to Chesapeake. The distance between Williamsburg and the mouth of Chesapeake, where the French fleet was anchored, was 60 miles. Washington and Rochambeau traveled that distance by small boat to plan strategy with de Grasse on board his ship. Due to a violent storm, they were unable to return to Williamsburg until September 2nd. On the morning of September 28th, the Allies, now 18,000 strong, marched down the road from Williamsburg towards Yorktown, while de Grasse's fleet began to sail upriver. The next day, the Allies began firing on the British. For the next week, the Allies' main task was building a series of trenches from which they could fire upon Yorktown. On the afternoon of October 9th, the Allies began firing huge cannons, first targeting the British ships in the harbor and then the town. Over the next 24 hours, the shelling was very intense. That day, more than 3,600 shells fell on the town and the harbor. For the next week, the Allies continued to advance even closer to the British positions. On the morning of October 16th, Cornwallis could foresee the inevitable and tried to escape with his troops across the river. However, the Allies' guns and bad weather forced him to abandon that plan. The next day, Cornwallis sent word to the Allies of his proposal to stop hostilities for 24 hours to settle terms of surrender. Finally, on the morning of October 19th, Washington and Rochambeau received and signed the Articles of Capitulation, which have already been signed by Lord Cornwallis. After 5 long years, the new nation had finally gained their independence.
We thank all the members of the Middle School History Club, including their 2 advisors, for the nice job they did reading the narrative. And that brings us to the point in the today's proceedings where we're going to unveil the historical marker.
3, 2, 1. All right. Nice job, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. First, representing Westchester County is Mary Jane Shimsky, Assemblyman.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'd like to thank the Ardsley Historical Society, Superintendent Schoenfeld, and the Ardsley Schools. The Village of Ardsley has been very supportive of what is a very active historical society as well. Mayor Kabulian and Trustee Edelstein are here. And I'd also like to thank the Middle School History Club. When I was in graduate school, I remember reading a model curriculum that one of the great public intellectuals of the late 1800s put together for American public schools. And it's a curriculum which may not be followed today, but has been instrumental over the generations. And you read through it and you see everything on it. You notice something is missing. History. There's this idea that some people had and some people still have, that history is completely irrelevant to who we are and what we do as a country. Of course, we know that that's not true at all. That no matter who you are and where you live, the history under your feet informs what you are and what is going on around you and what is going to come after you. And one of the things we see in this country and in this world in recent years is people who don't understand how their countries came to be what they are today often fall prey to the worst misinformation. We have to inoculate ourselves and make sure we understand who we are and how we came to be. And step 1 in all of that is understanding the history under our feet. So I want to thank everyone involved who made this demonstration of the history under Ardsley's feet possible. And I just want to say to the members and the advisors of the Middle School History Club, keep up the good work, because none of us may be able to know or predict the importance of what you're doing. So please keep it up. Thank you very much, everyone.
The next person I'd like to mention is Paul Feiner, Town Supervisor for Greenberg, who has become the proud owner of the property where the Odell House is. For those of you that drove past it for many years on Ridge Road, you saw it deteriorating when it was under the direction of the Sons of the American Revolution. And fortunately, Paul, since he's become owner, has engaged with the state and has been able to get grants, matching grants from the state of New York, and now he's established an excellent partnership with Susan Seal, who I'll introduce in a moment, who's the president of the Friends of the Odell House. Paul, did you want to say anything?
I just want to, thank you, and I'd like to thank the club, the middle school club, for the presentation you made. I learned a lot, and every time I ride my bicycle around, because I'm a big bicyclist, I look at all the markers, and every time, I start thinking, boy, George Washington was here, Rochambeau was here, and when you think about it, 200 or 300 years from now, maybe there'll be a marker saying Ardsley High School was here. But I also think that these markers make history relevant. And, I was thinking while you were talking, I said, right now a lot of students are studying for the SATs. But a few hundred years ago, they were worried about freedom. And it's so incredible, what you're doing. And, I want to really commend you and the Ardsley Historical Society for your fantastic, efforts making history, relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. And now Susan Seal, who has been instrumental trying to put the vision of the Odell House into reality. Her efforts have led to first stabilizing the Odell House, preventing further deterioration, and now refurbishing it and engaging in the planning for the use of the buildings and the property to become that museum that we spoke about earlier, that one day will be open to the public, including the children of the neighboring school districts.
Susan.
Good morning. I'm not going to let Ted, the history hound, talk. I think this is the beginning of an even larger partnership than the one that Paul and I already have. The house is moving along. The restoration starts on Monday for the new roof. We have all kinds of projects of study underway, and yesterday we launched on our website a phenomenal video aimed at kids who don't know as much as you guys do, but it talks about the French March and how they came to Greenberg and where they camped and everything. So that's on our website now. Your superintendent is going to, I think, distribute it to all the schools on Monday. And I really want to expand our partnership, because Peter and I have been working for I don't know how many years to get Odell House into the hands of a good caretaker like the town, and to now get this marker done. And I am just so happy that he's been able to do it. We're really looking forward to student tours, probably starting in the spring. Maybe not indoors completely, but we'll have the grounds done to a certain extent. And it's a town treasure. All of Greenberg should be very, very proud of.
And of course, last but not least, we're fortunate to have Mayor Kabulian and Trustee Edelstein with us, who have both been super supportive of not only the Ardsley Historical Society, but also the school district, and really have been a pleasure to work with. So thank you, Nancy, for coming. Thank you, Steve. And there you are. Thank you. Did you want to say anything? Okay. Thank you again for your support. That brings us to the end of today's event. I thank you all for coming. I thank you all for your support. And I just ask you, when you drive by and you see those 15 words on there, understand that there's a whole lot of history behind that. And that 5-year period from 1776 to 1781 really was a demonstration by the people at that time of how important it was to get their independence. Many of those soldiers that camped on this property were away from home, away from their wives and children for much of those 5 years, and that's how important freedom was for them. So thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.